When we started, let's say my biggest worry was how this will impact our culture, or will people see this as a friction point internally, right? And because I guess when you go into this type of experiment, it's always like, what if this fails, right? And I think we need to talk about that as well. What's kind of the measure of success, and what's even perceived as failure? And I must say that today I'm looking at this topic totally different than when we were starting off. So before we jump to that, I'd just like to ask you one kind of specific question for your work. Even internally, we see different approaches, right? Some teams go all in, some kind of try to ease in. What's your take on what would be the best approach for this to succeed?
Yeah, so based on the data that we have available at the moment, and I suppose it's worth noting as well that we conduct the trials, but they're actually independently evaluated by academics. So we don't influence the findings. We are simply able to provide data set for the academics to evaluate. A majority of companies who've been involved in trials today have been small and medium enterprises. So they've actually been able to have the flexibility to be creative and innovative with their human resource and probably go all in with their resources. Though we started working with some large organizations in the last month or the last year as well. And they've kind of got slightly different in the sense that they might pick a unit where they know this might work well and want to prove that it can work well. Some might try to do a cross section of a few different departments, some parts where they know it will work well, some where maybe they expect some resistance, some where the idea before they might never seem to work like it frontline work, and try and understand those different ways of which we can apply a 4-day week. So the simple answer is there is no right way. There's only the right way for your organization. I think a necessary indicator is understanding the change readiness of your leadership to actually embark on this journey. So if you are a team that has a culture of, failing fast, fail quickly, and iterate and realize the power of failure as a means to learning, then I think you are probably going to go more all in with this approach. Whereas if you are a very risk-averse organization with strong bureaucratic structures of decision-making, then it probably will be only palatable to leadership that you trial this in a smaller pocket first. So that would have been our experience with companies to date.
In terms of easing in, or in terms of deploying this across the teams, you said it really depends from the culture of experimentation, or are you risk averse or not risk averse. For us, it was a bit different. We said we're not at risk averse, but we need our business to work, right? We don't have millions in the bank that we can just freely invest in this. This cannot be an altruistic project for us. It needs to be sound business decision, right? And we picked a team. That's why we selected a smaller team to implement this, because we knew that we're gonna be able to measure the results, and not just like the personal well-being ones, which you do through surveys and whatnot, but also like the macro, the objective. How much work has been done? Did this change? And we really needed to have a really clear answer. Okay, in the team it was the development team. In the development team, will we see a drop in performance? And my view, being a skeptic and all, was that after we see the drop in performance, what do we do next, right? So I think this is a good segue to talk about results, right? Because for us, the results were good. I mean, it's really funny because sometimes I talk to people in the industry and I talk about 4-day work week, and I tell them, yeah, we work just 4 days, and everybody's, but how do you compensate for the lack of the output, right? And I always ask, what lack of output. It's insane because people, in our own internal benchmark, not academic ones, but the ones that are really measure our own output, we've shown that people spend less time working to output more. So at the end of the week, even though people typically work 8 hours less, they do more work than before. They output more. And talking to the employees, and I'm sure you're going to back that up with practical results from your studies, is that it's an insane perk for the employees, right? It's, mental health, well-being. It's all of these, let's say, factors, right? And from a business perspective, like I said, I mean, there's so much output. So it's really, really good for business as well. Plus, we get what we call a reserve capacity. So with our implementation, we said, okay, guys, you're going to work 4 days a week. You have one day per week off. You can pick which day. You can coordinate this internally. You can be flexible with that. But generally speaking, there's 1 day per week that we don't bother you, and you need to coordinate with the rest of the teams. So this works for the organization, obviously. But like in every business, sometimes there's like higher force, right? Something really goes wrong, and like from a systems theory, from our perspective, this usually was now something went wrong. Everybody's working to their max. Where do we get the additional capacity? There's no capacity to spare. Here, perhaps every couple of months, there's some special event, and people say, okay, hey, we're getting full pay for 5 days a week. Like we're working 5 days a week. We're actually working 4 days a week. It's not a problem, Luka, if we need to work for this Friday, just so that we as a team, we achieve something, right? And that's one of the big perks. And the final was obviously it's hiring, right? It's a very competitive world in terms of talent. So it's an insane perk that you can offer to future employee, right? So how does that compare to like a typical experience that you've seen in the companies that implemented 4-day work week?
Yeah, by and large, quite similar. What I think is happening is that all we are doing is showing that what science has been saying for a long time actually works in practical terms. So when you actually marry human psychology and physiology to effort within the workplace, you will get a peak in return of investment. And you want people a small bit stressed so that they're working at peak performance, but you don't want them so stressed that actually their performance wanes. And what we're doing is tipping the balance back to getting them up at that peak of performance. The reality is that the world of work now is highly cognitive and emotional, as opposed to very physical. And the traditional 5-day work week came from a workforce that was very physically laborious and repetitive. Whereas now we have to constantly change our behaviors, change our communications, depending on clients, all of that sort of stuff. And the reality is that drains us much quicker than doing repetitive physical work. So that's where you see issues of burnout and stress starting to rise exponentially within our workforces, because we're doing working hours equivalent of an industrial labor worker as opposed to, a cognitive worker, which is what majority of us are now. And what you see in organizations is that you see a significant reduction in individual levels of stress, coupled with an increased level of physical activity and improvement in sleep, which leads to a positive transference then to individuals' performance in their work. So they're able to, as you say, not just do 5 days work in 4 days, but often do more than 5 days work in 4 days. So they're actually able to, because they're more rested, they're actually able to think a little bit more laterally and problem solve in a much more innovative way than maybe the tunnel visioned way of working that they were constantly focused on. At the team level, then I think what you find is there is this level of accessing collaboration as a resource that was maybe not previously tapped into before. And it's because organizations constantly tell themselves the lie that they're collaborating well, but actually all they're just doing is talking a lot to each other. So there's never a very direct focus on understanding the team as a unit and how to make the team unit work better to try and reduce workload and working time. And then lastly, I suppose you see that ripple into organizational performance. So improvement in revenue scores have been found by, a majority of companies reporting on revenue, which is, a hugely positive finding that's been consistently replicated now across many of the pilot studies. I agree with you. I was skeptical of the findings as well. I am an academic before being a CEO, so I value the objectivity of knowledge, and understanding something and whether it's reality or not, or whether it's a marketing tool. And I can say, this is something that works. It's not without its challenges, but it is a worthwhile challenge to engage on because it can lead to such positive effects for everyone involved.